Hello and welcome to Reportage. This is Daanish bin Nabi. HarperCollins has come up with a wonderful biography of Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah, written by historian Chitralekha Zutshi. The biography is titled Sheikh Abdullah, the Caged Lion of Kashmir. It's a well-researched document, and many of the things mentioned in the book are said for the first time about the controversial political figure of Kashmir. More from the author. Chitralekha, many things have been written about Sheikh Abdullah. There are a number of research papers, books, biographies, everything is there. Let's start this discussion with complete basic things about Sheikh Abdullah's life, his personal as well as political. Let me begin by asking you, why did Sheikh went to Aligarh? What motivated him and why did he choose MSc degree?
Why did he go to Aligarh? I think that once he left Kashmir in 1924, he went to Lahore, of course. And Lahore was a life-changing experience for him. It broadened his sort of intellectual horizons. It brought him into contact with Muhammad Iqbal, right, who became a source of inspiration and a father.
This is before going to Aligarh for his MSc degree.
Yes. So he got a BSc degree first, right, from Islamia College, Lahore. And there he came into contact with, as I said, Muhammad Iqbal and the proprietors of newspapers and the whole host of other Indian Muslim leaders, right, who with whom he kind of, I think, at that time he was very young, right? But they really influenced his way of thinking. It broadened his sort of political outlook and so on. He was a very sort of parochial, obviously he had grown up in Kashmir and, didn't have a very broad outlook. So going to Lahore really opened him. And it's the professors at Islamia College, Lahore, who then encouraged him to go to Aligarh Muslim University to pursue further studies. So
why did he choose MSc in chemistry? Why not any other subject in humanities? Was it because of his BSc background?
Yes. Yeah, I think he had always been a student of science, right? I mean, he was better at sciences, and that sort of sets him apart from all the other political leaders, right, of 20th century South Asia and the world, because most of them are not, students of science. They're all students of humanities or the law and so on and so forth. But he was, distinct in that way, and as a result, he wasn't particularly well read, right? Because I mean, if you were a student of humanities, you read a lot more than if you were a student of science. So, and I think that stayed with him throughout his life. He had this kind of feeling that he was somehow, not as intellectually kind of open as the other leaders and so on. So so he went on to study chemistry. He had never been a particularly good student, but I think that both Islamia College and Aligarh Muslim University really broadened his outlook, opened his intellectual horizons.
But was he interested in studies?
Not particularly, I don't think. I won't say he was, particular.
And
because
how many marks he scored in MSc?
I have no idea.
And you haven't researched about it.
Yeah. He, as I said, he wasn't a particularly good student. All I got from all of my research was that he didn't do particularly well, but he did.
You are
get
a researcher and a historian. If we look out for the records at the Aligarh University, will these records be available there?
I seriously doubt it. I mean, with the state of records at most universities, I seriously doubt that these records will be available. And in any case, I wasn't interested in that. I wasn't interested in kind of figuring out, these little particularities
but
about
there
Sheikh
are
Abdullah.
people back in Kashmir who are interested in Sheikh Abdullah's educational background. There are people back in Kashmir who are interested how much score this so-called leader of Kashmiris has scored in his MSc. That's why I'm asking you this question.
Right. No, I understand that. But that's not, I wasn't writing from that perspective, right? So I'm not.
Which I completely get.
I don't. So my brief in this biography was not to reveal things about Sheikh Abdullah that nobody knew and kick up dirt about him. That was not what I want. I wanted to write sort of this.
But I get your point. But educational background for any leader is very important. And when I was reading your book, I got a number of messages and calls about asking me about his educational background.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, but I'm telling you what I know, which is that, he wasn't a particularly good student. He did pass his MSc and, come back and so on. So, his mind had always been more interested in, what was going on around him, right? And not so much sort of, he wasn't sort of, most people who are erudite and really good at studies don't end up as politicians, frankly. They become
Completely
other
get your
things.
point.
So, he was obviously interested in other things. And I think that both of these institutions and cities, whether it's Lahore or Aligarh, really connected him to a broader network of politics, right? Which he obviously hadn't had any, um, sort of interaction with. But what made him really a leader was coming back to Kashmir, right? So it wasn't in these places. Nobody knew him in Lahore or Aligarh, and there were other people around him who were much more sort of, engaged and so on. So
Completely, Chitralekha. Once he's back from from
right.
Aligarh, with his
Right.
MSc degree, one of the first influential political leaders is Sir Iqbal. He is
Right.
very close to Sir Iqbal in mid to late 1920s.
Right.
How did Iqbal, being close to Iqbal, shaped Sheikh Abdullah's political thinking?
I think, as I said, Muhammad Iqbal was a very sort of, a source of inspiration for him, but also a sort of served as a father figure for Sheikh Abdullah, because Abdullah was born after his father had passed away, right? So he always felt like he was always trying to fill this gap, right? Um, in his life. And I think Nehru also served not so much as a father figure, but at least an older brother figure for him. So he always had these figures in his life that filled that gap that he had felt growing up without a father. Right. So Muhammad Iqbal, of course, served that purpose, but he was also very influenced by Iqbal's oratory. The way that Iqbal spoke, and he emulated that. Right. He was also very influenced by his poetry, especially poetry about injustice. But I think most importantly, Iqbal put him in touch with this network of expatriate Kashmiri Muslims, right, who had been advocating for Kashmiri Muslims in the valley, right? I mean, they had the Kashmiri Musalman conference. I mean, all sorts of organizations since the early 20th century that had been working for the uplift of Kashmiri Muslims. And I think getting involved in the politics of those organizations is what really brought Sheikh Abdullah out into the sort of political sphere. And then those organizations, by the way, once he made his first foray into politics in Kashmir, it's those organizations that really kind of spread his name in Punjab, right? Nobody
It was
knew who Sheikh
basically,
Abdullah was.
you write in your book, it was basically this Punjabi press which basically
Yeah.
built up his image.
Right. In at least for the Muslims of the Punjab and Kashmiri Muslims of the Punjab and so on. So that played a very, very important. They were also a source of funding, right? I mean, Sheikh Abdullah and these small reading groups, they needed funding in the early years, and when they became a Muslim conference. So who provided the funding? It was all these organizations in the Punjab. So I think Iqbal was the conduit through which this was happening. So other than being sort of a source of inspiration, he was also a very source of practical sort of funding and contacts and all the things that any sort of political leader needs when they are first establishing themselves. But of course, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Sheikh Abdullah started his speeches first by Quran, then by quoting Iqbal. Was it copy pasted from Iqbal?
Copy pasted from Iqbal meaning? What do you mean?
Was Iqbal doing the same first when he would say something?
Oh, I
or
see.
He would address the people. He would start with Quran and then with his some couplets, because Sheikh Abdullah was doing same throughout his entire career.
Not so much. I don't think Iqbal was doing exactly the same. I think Sheikh Abdullah developed his own style, right? Because he also spoke to the people in Kashmiri. He spoke to them in an idiom that the Kashmiri Muslim masses kind of understood and could identify with, and so on, right? I mean, he did use some of Iqbal's verses. He also quoted other poets as well, but but yeah, he started with the Quran. It was not, I don't think it was copy pasted from Iqbal. It was copy pasted from Iqbal in the sense that the poetry was Iqbal's, of course, a lot of the poetry, but but I think Sheikh Abdullah had his own style. I mean, he was really from an early age, a good orator of the Quran and poetry and so on. I mean, he had a gift. There are some people who have a gift of sort of public speaking, and he was one of those people. He also had a presence, right? I mean, he was a imposing figure, as you know. I mean, he was tall and spoke with this kind of fearlessness, right? I mean, he spoke unhesitantly. He was charismatic, and he was very attractive in that way. So he,
Was he attractive?
Yeah, he was attractive in the sense that there are some people who have a presence, right? I mean, some people enter the room and they have a presence, and I think that's what he had. And you need that if you want to be a political leader, right? I mean, there's, if you're this kind of diminutive figure like Afzal Beg, for instance, who was in some ways probably much smarter than him, right? But didn't have that presence, right? He was a little man, little rotund man, So he also, the other thing about Sheikh Abdullah is that he didn't have any kind of family background that would stymie him, right? I mean, he was from a very modest family. They had never been involved in any politics and so on. All these other leaders around him, they were all, came from families who had been involved in government service, this, that. So he had a clean slate in some ways to be able to kind of take on the reins of, yeah.
One of the political figures around Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah in 20s and 30s was Prem Nath Bazaz. How instrumental was Bazaz in taking Sheikh close to Nehru?
Prem Nath Bazaz was instrumental in many ways.
Yeah.
I mean, he was he was very involved in the politics of the sort of post Glancy Commission, right, after the 1931 incidents and so on. And he was very
you also mentioned in your book that he first wrote to Gandhi about Sheikh Abdullah, then to Nehru.
Right. Not about Sheikh Abdullah. He didn't write about Sheikh Abdullah. He
but
wrote
the overall situation of Kashmir.
Right. He wrote to Gandhi and Nehru about the politics of Kashmir. Sheikh Abdullah has no, because it was not about Sheikh Abdullah. It was really about, where can we take the movement in Kashmir, and how can we make it more inclusive. I think Bazaz sort of, as a Kashmiri Pandit, wanted this movement not just to be about Kashmiri Muslims, but to bring in, and he was also, of course, a socialist and follower of M.N. Roy. So he thought in terms of class and not religion, right? And I think in that way he was really instrumental in getting Sheikh Abdullah to also think about, I mean, who are the masses in Kashmir, and so that the movement is not just a movement for educated Kashmiri Muslims to get into government service, right? I mean, how does that help these, masses who are living in crushing poverty, right? And degradation and exploitation and repression. And so how does it help them, right? So the language of the movement was changed. And I think Bazaz was very much instrumental in changing the language of the movement. I don't think he was necessarily the reason behind Sheikh Abdullah's
getting close to Nehru.
Yeah, I don't, that's not the sense I got.
Then who was the person? How did they gel up so much with each other? What was the reason behind this friendship?
I think there
who was the person, or
things.
what was the event which brought them close, apart from that visit to NWFP?
Yeah, no, I think that there's confluence of several things in the late 1930s, right, that are taking place. So I'm giving you like a broader context now for this. And my sense, from my research was that, okay, so in the late 1930s, Sheikh Abdullah wants to extricate himself from the politics of the Punjabi Muslims, right? Because he's being sucked into that. They're controlling the movement, right, in Kashmir. He is being called Ahmadiyya, and he's being, he's they're saying that he's not really a Muslim, he's become an Ahmadiyya, all sorts of things because of the involvement of the Ahmadiyyas in the Kashmiri Muslim movement. So so he wanted to extricate himself from that. the other thing that happens in the late 1930s, of course, is the 1937 provincial elections in British India, right? In which the Congress does really well, but it does extremely poorly with Indian Muslims, right? I mean, it registers almost none. So the Congress begins this kind of Muslim mass contact campaign, puts K.M. Ashraf in charge of it. K.M. Ashraf comes to Kashmir, meets with Abdullah. He's the one who's kind of, if there's one person you want to kind of, pin down on, who brought them together.
It's the K.M. Ashraf, not the Prem Nath Bazaz.
Yeah. Well, Prem Nath Bazaz is important in a sort of broader way because he too thought about it, in the sort of congressional, way of secularism and nationalism and so on. But K.M. Ashraf really is the one who kind of, wants, he's put in charge of getting Muslims into the Congress fold, right? And he visits Kashmir in 1937. He's the one who organizes this meeting with Nehru in the Lahore, railway station when he's going off to NWFB. And Sheikh Abdullah meets with Nehru, and he's, drawn to him. He's interested in this idea of class being the reason why people are suffering rather than their religious identification and so on. And he really feels that will recharge the movement, extricate it from the politics of the Punjabi Muslims, make it more independent and quote unquote independent. But also for him, for Sheikh Abdullah on a personal level, this is an opportunity to kind of hobnob with these national leaders in India, right? So he feels important, when he's doing this. Of course, his critics at that time say that, what you've done is, taken yourself out from the influence of one group of people into the influence of other group of people, right? So there's, you're basically losing your independence either way. So I think it's the sort of broader context, and also Sheikh Abdullah's own inclinations for being more independent and being sort of, seen as being not just a provincial leader of Kashmiris, but someone who could be sitting in congressional meetings of the Congress and invited to Lahore for that and so on. He wanted to have more to do with these national level leaders and so on. Yeah.
After reading and understanding Kashmir, its conflict, its inception of this Kashmir conflict, I fail to understand one thing, and which I would like to learn from you, is that if Maharaja and Sheikh Abdullah both had a notion of wanted Kashmir to be an independent state with the guarantees from Pakistan, India, UK, and US, including the UN, why did they fail to work together for this thing?
Sheikh Abdullah and the Maharaja's relationship, of course, extremely fraught, right, from the very beginning. I think Sheikh Abdullah, when these decisions were being made, right, about princely states and partition and so on, Sheikh Abdullah was in prison, right? I mean, this. I mean, he was put in prison in May of 1946, didn't come out till late September 1947. So this was the crucial moment when this could have been worked
happening
out, right?
Around, yeah.
When all of this is happening, right? And when the Maharaja is basically kind of talking about, I want to be independent, but not really doing anything about it, right? And by the time Sheikh Abdullah comes out, it's too late. I mean, it's simple. There's a simple answer to your question. It's too late, right? It's too late because India and Pakistan have come into existence. The Maharaja is still hemming and hawing their standstill agreements. And more importantly, the Punchis and the Gilgitis have, started a revolt. So the unity of the state that was required for this to be able to happen, right, has
that
already,
was not there. Yeah,
it already, it's already, it's already kind of, the state has gone its own way. So
yeah,
it's fallen apart. And then you have, the attack and so on, and then it's over. I mean, there's no way then after that, this whole independence thing could have been worked out, right? But the personal relationship between the Sheikh and the Maharaja was really, really terrible. So when the Sheikh comes out, the Maharaja does not want to release him. Okay. Nehru and Patel put serious pressure on him that you have to release him because he's the only one who can resolve this question, and maybe you can. So when Sheikh Abdullah comes out, he goes around saying, we want freedom before accession, right? So we'll decide between India and Pakistan, but freedom for him meant the Maharaja has to go, right? So from the very beginning, he didn't want to work with the Maharaja. There's no way that this was gonna, happen. So I think that the fact that he, because of this personal relationship, really bad personal relationship with the Maharaja, and then once he's comes out, it's too late because the situation is just, the context is changed. You cannot, work these things out.
Both were
And of course,
basically traveling on a parallel paths.
Who's traveling on parallel paths?
Maharaja and Sheikh.
I don't know if they're necessarily parallel, but Maharaja. Sheikh Abdullah just wanted the Maharaja to leave. He did not want the Maharaja there anymore. He said that with his Quit Kashmir movement in 1946. So he did not want to work.
There was absolutely no question of working together for their dream.
There was there was no way that this was gonna work out. Not with the Maharaja there. And once the Indian army is in Kashmir and Kashmir has acceded to India, right? Sheikh Abdullah continues his war against the Maharaja, right? Because the Maharaja is still there, right? So he continues to kind of, hit at him until he can abdicates and his son comes into, comes in as head of state, So he continues this much to the kind of, Patel's like, there's like, can you please stop this? It's over now and so on. But he continues because for Sheikh Abdullah, he was the one who represented Kashmir sovereignty. So if there was a Maharaja there, right, who embodied the sovereignty as well, then the Sheikh couldn't, right? So that there couldn't be these two together at one place. Yeah.
Completely. So in the book, now the Sheikh Abdullah is the emergency administrator, 1947. Then 6 years of his rule are completely corrupt. There is complete repression going on in Kashmir, and comes 53, he gets arrested. Was Nehru in know-how of this arrest? Obviously, he knew about things coming, but was he arrested on behest of Nehru, or Nehru had only explicitly said that only to dethrone him, not to arrest him?
Yeah, exactly. It was the latter of what you said. I think Nehru, by the time, already early 1953, was beginning to think that Sheikh Abdullah was not, going to be able to work with India, and had started turning to people like Bakshi and others who had, were clearly pro-India. So by August of 1953, it had become untenable. He tried, by the way, Nehru tried and tried and tried.
Exactly. I just forgot. Because consistently Nehru is calling him to Delhi, and he's completely refusing to go to Delhi and meet Nehru.
Yep. So once
I guess at least for 3 to 4 months. This is now 19. Why did he not went to Delhi to meet him, to sort out the differences? What was holding him back?
I think it was a Praja Parishad movement. Sheikh Abdullah got very, 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 very angry and upset about the Praja Parishad movement, which he felt was, he took it personally. Right?
But why did he not take it personally in 1947? Because this Praja Parishad was still there that time. In fact, there was a massacre going off Muslims in Jammu portions. That time he did not take it personally. But why this time?
No, he took it at that time. At that time, by the way, he was Sheikh Abdullah spoke out against the massacres of Muslims, by the way, and the genocide.
But it happened, the second and third wave of Muslim massacre happened under his own watch, when he was the emergency administrator.
Correct. Yeah. But I think that by 1953, he had started taking it personally because I think the movement had become much more organized, and it was specifically actually against him, And he felt that Nehru was not doing enough to quell the movement, right? And of course, Nehru didn't have that kind of, Nehru didn't have any, that kind of power. Nehru was an elected head of state. It's not like he can, bring, Nehru, of course, tried to speak to Mukherjee and get him to tone it down. But it, the movement had its own momentum and it was going strong. And Sheikh Abdullah really felt that he, was not, was not backing him anymore, I think.
But he could have gone and met him and sorted out the differences, even if it was this Praja Parishad moment.
Yeah, I mean, he really sounds at that time like a bit of a petulant child. He's very, he's like, I don't want to come, and there's nothing else to talk about, and so on. Which is what increases sort of Nehru's frustration. Right? He's like, I'm calling you, you don't come, and I mean, after all, Nehru was the Prime Minister of India. I mean, he was quite rude. He was quite rude and disrespectful toward him, and Nehru continued to keep reaching out to him until he, of course, stopped, and he's like, okay, this is it, I'm done. In part because Nehru was meeting with Muhammad Ali Bogra, right, the Pakistani Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And Sheikh Abdullah's talk and all this confusion in Kashmir was making it difficult because they were really, I mean, Bogra and Nehru were close to really coming to some sort of an agreement. They were really sincerely speaking to each other. And so I think that at that time, Nehru said, okay, I'm done, done with this. So he has to be, removed. But he was never for Sheikh Abdullah's arrest. He did not want him to be arrested. And he was very, very broken up about it. He was very upset. He said,
so but why was he arrested then? If Nehru was against his arrest,
who ordered his arrest? Bakshi. I mean, it was Karan Singh, the Sadr Riyasat, right, who was on Bakshi's behest, because Bakshi said. So Bakshi
Karan
said
Singh wanted him behind the bars.
No, Karan Singh didn't want it. This is not one person wanting anyone behind bars. I don't think that's it. Bakshi said, I will not take over the reins of Jammu and Kashmir as the Prime Minister until Sheikh Abdullah is removed from the scene. Okay, because if I come in, his supporters will gather together and he will become a rallying, sort of, symbol for rallying the Kashmiris, and I cannot rule Kashmir if this is happening. So he said he has to be arrested, and so the arrest warrant was signed by Karan Singh, who was the head of state, right? And they arrested him. And Nehru, the next day after it happened, right, writes to Bakshi saying, I know that Sheikh Abdullah needed to be, removed from office, but I am not for his arrest. And I have a deep sense of misgiving against it. This is the worst thing that could have happened. I do not like the things being done in the dark, he said, because he was really arrested in the middle of, like early hours of the morning when it was dark. And I don't like the way it has been done. And he kept trying for years and years and years to get him released, right? But then, there's a whole sort of...
The system came into play.
There's a whole, exactly. There's a whole bureaucracy around him that's preventing that from happening, right? Because Nehru doesn't have the power, right? As he's an elected head of state, he can't. So, so it... then it took on... sort of, a life of its own, Sheikh Abdullah. And Sheikh Abdullah behind bars became a hero, right? I mean, he became a martyr. He became a symbol of Kashmiri self-determination and so on. So I think it suited Sheikh Abdullah as well to be behind bars, right?
And it happened at a moment when his
popularity was very low.
Yeah, at a completely lowest ebb.
Yep, absolutely. So that resurrected him. The arrest kind of resurrected him immediately in the eyes of people, right? So
just there is this perception about accord with Sheikh's accord with Indira Gandhi of 1975. The perception is in Kashmir rather that it was only after Pakistan Army's defeat in 1971 that Sheikh decided to go with India. Are these assertions true?
I think that had a role to play in it, most certainly, right? Because by the defeat of Pakistan in the Bangladesh war was a very serious incident that showed to the Sheikh that Pakistan was no longer sort of a form of leverage that he could use with India, right? Because he had always Pakistan as, there's this alternative, for Kashmiris, for him. But once this happened, he realized that, that point of leverage was gone, right? I mean, Pakistan had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of India. So yes, that played an important role. But then there were other factors as well, right? So that was one of the many things. So by 1971, again, Sheikh Abdullah is feeling like, he's starting to feel obsolete in Kashmir, right? Because there's a new assertive generation of leaders who are emerging. The younger generation is, starting to question his leadership. What has he achieved, since, taking power in 1948 and then being removed in 1950. So between 1953 and 1970, what has he done? He hasn't, the Kashmir issue has not moved, right, at all. So he was feeling the pressure, right, of that. He was also getting older. He wasn't in particularly good health. His family was putting pressure on him to kind of cement their legacy, right, in Kashmir. So if he was to die in exile and die as a, in Delhi, then what would happen to the Abdullahs, right? So there were all of these factors together that by the early 1970s, he had decided, along with Afzal Beg, that they would try to come to some sort of a rapprochement with India.
But this was, I think, as you mentioned in the book, his talks when he was in jail with T.N. Cole, not in jail, in Delhi guest house. Yeah. He already had in 1967, 1968, he was having talks with T.N. Cole about a rapprochement with India.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's the T.N. Cole talks that really lead to the accord, right? I mean, that's the starting point of it. Because as I said, by the late 1960s already, he's coming around to this idea that he's, that he's losing his influence in Kashmir. And pretty soon nobody in India is going to care about him either, right? So he's afraid that he's going to become obsolete. And so he's, starts making kind of overtures, right, through various intermediaries to the Indian government. And then he, starts, and then, but he's still, if you read my book, you can see in the T.N. Cole talks, he's still very assertive, right? I mean, he's like, I want still autonomy for Kashmiris and this, that, and the other. But by 1971, that changes, right? Because after 1971, I mean, so that bluster that he has, that, we still want to go back to the pre-1953 position, that all seems to, kind of go away, right? And then he does it again. He seems to do it unilaterally, right? The accord. I mean, even the people very close to him, other than Afzal Beg, even the people very close to him were not involved in these talks. So everyone was shocked about, how did this happen? And it was all done behind the scenes. And what did Kashmir achieve? Nothing. Right? It was just basically saying the same thing over again about Article 370. That's all the accord did. It was really kind of meaningless, right? So yeah, but so Pakistan, I think Pakistan's defeat in 1971 was one of many,
factors involved in having accord with Indira Gandhi.
Exactly.
In the book, one of the interesting analysis you have done at the starting of the book is that three generations of Kashmir view Sheikh Abdullah very differently. 1920, 30s generation view him entirely differently. 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s generation view him entirely differently. 70s, 80s, 90s generation view him entirely differently. So explain it for the viewers. Why have you categorized Sheikh Abdullah in three different time frames?
One of the reasons that I wrote Sheikh Abdullah's biography, right, was of course because he's an important leader in Kashmir and I'm a historian of Kashmir and so on, but also because I was interested in how differently different people were talking to me about him. Whenever I talk to them, this is not for the biography. Whenever I had conversations about Kashmir's history, there were some people, usually the older generation, who would describe him almost in these saintly terms. He was a saint and he brought us out of darkness, medieval darkness and servitude and so on. And he's the tallest leader of Kashmir and so on. And then I would talk to another generation of Kashmiris and they would just badmouth him. I mean, you know that. I mean, say really like terrible things about him. And then the younger generation, the ones that I usually, I always used to stay in Kashmir University campus and I would talk to them and they didn't care. They didn't, they was like, who Sheikh Abdullah? Yeah, we've heard. Is that the one who did the land reform? So there was this kind of interesting differences in the way that people were talking about Sheikh Abdullah. And that's one of the reasons I decided that I wanted to probe why this was the case, that there was such a wide range, right? And if you add sort of India and Pakistan to this, then you can see that within India and Pakistan as well, his image is constantly changing and shifting, right? Depending on the moment and depending on what he's doing and so on. So I wanted to kind of figure out where these narratives came from, right? And also how Sheikh Abdullah engaged with these narratives, because Sheikh Abdullah was a really sort of very, very in tune with how people were thinking about him, whether it was his own constituency, whether it was in India, whether it was in Pakistan. So he was always thinking about it. He was constantly trying to intervene and shape his own, image, right? So this idea of image and the way these narratives were created is one of the main reasons I wrote this biography, right? And which is why you find it in the introduction, right? That this is the way. But, again, it just shows you how, complex anyone's life, life is, right? And it really depends on who is describing them, because even as an individual, you have different relationships with different people, right? So I have different relationships with my sister than I have with my husband or my parents or whatever. They all see me differently, right? So I wanted to kind of look at Sheikh Abdullah through these various lenses, right? Not just through his own lens or how he saw himself, but how these other people saw him, right? So that was, yeah.
Chitralekha, my last two questions, not related to the book, but obviously interrelated to Kashmir, this book, and Sheikh Abdullah. And I want you to answer both the questions. Kindly do not skip them.
Okay.
Hence the question.
Yeah.
With Article 370 gone, do you think Sheikh Abdullah was wrong by aligning himself, Kashmir, and Kashmiris with India?
With Article 370 gone, was he wrong in aligning himself?
I told you not to skip the question.
No, I'm not skipping it. I'm not. Yeah. No, I'm gonna tell you. I'm giving you the answer, but I'm going to give you a historical answer in the sense that I don't think Sheikh Abdullah had any choice but to align with India, right? Because Sheikh Abdullah, I think, even in 1947, wanted some kind of autonomy, right? Not independence necessarily, because he knew Kashmir was too small to survive and so on. But he wanted a level of autonomy which he felt he could get only within India, because India had envisioned itself as this kind of, at least in the 1940s, for a moment, it was envisioning itself as this conglomeration of autonomous states, right? And he felt that Kashmir could attain that in, within
aligning
India.
itself with India.
By aligning itself with, and once the attack started in, and Poonch and Gilgit went their own way, and the attack started, then he had no choice, and he knew that this was going to be a difficult relationship, which it turned out to be for him personally as well, right? And even as he's given his agreement to sign the document of accession to India, he's already started giving interviews as early as 1948 to these, Western media, saying, Kashmir should be autonomous and it shouldn't have anything to do with either India or Pakistan and so on. So his views were actually not necessarily as simplistic as people in Kashmir sometimes say, right? That he forced or he took Kashmir to India and so on. As far as Article 370 itself is concerned, he never agreed with the final shape of Article 370. He wanted much more autonomy for Kashmir. Okay. And in the end, he was almost not forced to sign, but he had no choice again to sign, give his signature on the Constitution of India. Because he had really hoped that Article 370 would give Kashmir much more autonomy, right? So, so yeah, I think till the very end, Sheikh Abdullah felt that he had made the right choice, in the sense that all of the things that Kashmir should achieve could be achieved in India and not in Pakistan. Perhaps they could be achieved better if it were independent, but that possibility was, difficult to attain. Even he knew that, right? So, yeah, I think it's more.
Chitralekha,
Yeah.
point well taken. My
Yeah.
last question. August 5th, 2019,
Yeah.
had Sheikh Abdullah been alive, how would he have reacted to such thing?
I think he wouldn't have been surprised, right? Because one of the things that you get out of reading my book is that August 5th, 2019 was not the beginning of anything, right? It's the culmination of decades of dismantling of not just Article 370, but dismantling of the Kashmir state, right? So I think that it's not surprising that it happened, right? Because Article 370 itself had been
And it would
denuded.
not have surprised Sheikh Abdullah either.
It would not have surprised him at all. I mean, because Article 370 had been denuded by then to an extent that it was basically, hollow and meaningless, right? What it would have done, however, would have saddened him, I think, because, it would have, because it meant that this relationship between India and Kashmir had finally been broken, right? I mean, however you might want to, put it, he would feel that, that link was broken. Because ultimately, Sheikh Abdullah, for all of his flaws, right, was someone who felt that the relationship between Kashmir and India could be a good one, right? I mean, he truly believed this. He also believed that the relationship between or among Kashmir, India, and Pakistan, so Kashmir could bring India and Pakistan together. I mean, for decades, he kept going on and on and on and on about this, until 1971, when the whole thing happened with Pakistan's defeat. So he was the sort of link, right, between or among Pakistan, India, and Kashmir that was finally broken in 2019. So I think that he would have been deeply saddened, because it would have meant that his legacy was undone and broken, right? And you can see that because however much you might hate Sheikh Abdullah, and certain generation of Kashmiris do, he still embodies sort of the, essential Kashmiri identity, right? I mean, he's the one who led the movement first and so on. And it's no surprise that now, his image has been removed from police medals. His birthday is no longer, being celebrated as a state holiday. So the abrogation of Article 370 and the erasure of Abdullah's identity, so they're going together, right, in kind of interesting ways. So I think that he would have been saddened, right, because this would mean that all that he had worked for it in some ways ended. Yeah.
Chitralekha, Sheikh Abdullah would not have been surprised, but he would have been saddened by the events of August 5th, 2019.
Yeah.
Chitralekha, pleasure talking to me. Let me hold your book once again for the readers. And I do hope that people in Kashmir get this book, read it, analyze it, and again read it. Thank you very much for talking to me.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Daanish.
Please subscribe to our channel Reportage and press the bell icon to remain updated.